Big podcast.
All right. Sometimes you get schooled, called out. That's what happened to me. Not really. We'll go into it. It's Build a Big Podcast, the marketing podcast for podcasters. I'm David Hooper. This is the podcast if you want to grow your podcast. You want to get more people to your podcast. You want to make a podcast that matters. You want to make money with your podcast. You can find me at bigpodcast.com. I put out an episode, I put out a lot of them. A couple episodes ago, I was making a comment about feeds. And I said a couple of things as far as protecting your feed, which I believe, and we're going to get into that, how to protect your feed, how to protect your audience, make sure that you have access to them, but other people do not have access to them. And I had a follow-up question. I was joking around about being called out. This is a comment from Dave Jackson from School of Podcasting, who is a friend of mine. I've known him for years. We were in the music business together. So 25 years ago, I knew this dude before either of us got into podcasting. And he sent me a text. He said, "What are you talking about?" It had to do with feeds. I think I used the wrong words when I was talking about feeds. So I want to go into that a little bit more, talking about you protecting your feed, how people get your podcast, and making sure you have control of what is basically the pipeline from you to your audience. Here's what I said on that episode. I talked about locking your feed. And locking your feed is basically something where you are not able to transfer your podcast to a different host. So if you've got host A, you're not going to be able to move everything over to host B. There's only one host for you. It is host A. That feed is locked. You are not transferring things. I use that word probably incorrectly. The fact stands, though, that you want to be able to control your feed. Something that Dave brought up, and this is correct, is that a feed is just a text document. And people could literally go select all and then copy and then paste, and they've got your feed. Anything new that comes down a feed, they could set up something on Zapier or Pabbly Connect that grabs that new item and adds it to that feed that they took by selecting all and then copying it wherever they're redistributing your podcast. That's why somebody would do that. So when it comes down to this, no, nobody's going to transfer your feed, but they could still copy it. Is that a problem? Reality for me, and I think a lot of people, is if you're going to copy my feed and I've got people listening to me through that feed, they are still listening to me. Where it becomes a problem is if your business is based on different ads that you've inserted, and they can replace the ads that you have inserted with something that they are inserting and getting paid on. That could be an issue. So if you've got a big podcast, let's say it's Call Her Daddy. They steal the Call Her Daddy feed, say, "This is Call Her Daddy," wink, wink, and put their ads in it. They're making money off of you. And those podcasts, hundreds of thousands of downloads per episode. So it could be a considerable amount of money. That's where the issue lies. For people like you and me, probably not a problem. But I mention this because you do want to control your feed. Let's say you are hosting at a web hosting company, host A, and you've got what they call a slug. So let's say for me, it would be something like Big Podcast. And my feed is bigpodcast.hosta.com/feed. If I move from host A to host B and give up that slug, that username, somebody else can come in and they can do a podcast, bigpodcast.hosta.com/feed, and they can put their own stuff in it. I was mixing things up. They can still do that. Not all hosts will let you do that. It depends on if they let somebody reclaim a feed. It's like reclaiming a domain name. Somebody lets a domain name expire. You can go register that. Somebody lets a username expire. You can register that. So that is something for you to watch. The other thing for you to watch, and this is something that happened to me, I think it was a guy who maybe was trying to help, but there was also an element of he wanted to be associated with what I was doing. I had a podcast, came out of the gate strong, very popular. I was not launching it on Apple right away. I guess he's trying to get it through Apple, saw that it wasn't there. He said, "Oh, by the way, I submitted you to Apple." I said, no, I don't want you to submit me to Apple. So my podcast, under his banner on Apple. Now it's my feed. I'm getting all the downloads, but it says that I'm under his company's network. So all this traffic that I'm getting is building up his network. I said, no, man, come on. I mean, not a bad guy, but I had nothing to do with him. Again, I think he might have been just trying to help me, but it's not helpful. So I had to go to Apple, say, hey, you see this email address in this feed? That's me. I need to be in control of this feed. This is one of the reasons that you want to do everything you can to control your feed. Lock the thing down, have your own domain. I'm going to talk about that here in a second. Also, make sure you've got an email address in your feed. And that's optional now, but it's still a good idea, a dedicated feed email address where all the spam from people who want to be a guest on your podcast can go. But also, important stuff. You don't want to miss anything. What I like to do with those email addresses is bundle them up. I get a digest every week. I can see who's pitching me, but I can also see the important stuff. So I get, 20, 30 messages a week. I got pitch, important, pitch. I don't have to go through everything. All right, let's get to owning your domain. That's the second thing here. And I want to be very clear about this. This, I think, is the absolute most important thing you can do with your feed. Your feed, when I talk about something like bigpodcast.hosta.com/feed, the one you submit needs to be under a domain that you control. The feed for this podcast, feed.bigpodcast.com/BBP. That stands for Build a Big Podcast. So feed.bigpodcast.com/BBP. And if I'm on host A and I want to go to host B, I don't have to do a redirect. hosta.com to hostb.com. All I need to do is point feed.bigpodcast.com/BBP to host B. One flip for me, if I've got 1,000 listeners, let's say 10,000 listeners, they don't have to each flip everything over. It is seamless to them. I don't lose anybody. I'm surprised more people don't do this. $15 a year is the cost. You control your feed. It is under your domain. All those links coming in go into your website. Well, to your feed. But if you needed to flip things over to your website or reroute it to a different podcast or do whatever you want with it, it doesn't matter. The point is you can do it. Hosta.com, whatever they're doing, if you want to move, if they go out of business, anything, that's not going to affect you. You put your domain over to wherever your new feed is. Feedblitz.com, that's how to do it. $15 a year. That is their feed service. It's a good deal. It keeps you in control of your message. We're in a new year. You need to be in control of your message. That's one of the best things about podcasting. It's you with a direct pipeline to the audience that you want to reach. There's no spam filters. It's no algorithm. If somebody's raised his hand, yeah, I want this podcast. Put the feed in the podcast app, goes right there. And as long as you control that domain, it will continue to do that. If you've got questions about this, feel free to reach out to me. Blue Sky is the best way to do that. You can find contact information for me in the episode notes at podcast.bigpodcast.com. If you want to make sure that you don't miss an episode of this podcast, this is how to do it. Go to bigpodcast.com/subscribe. There are 3 buttons there, one for iPhone, one for Android, one is an RSS feed, which is feed.bigpodcast.com/BBP. But let's not get technical. I made it easy for you. One click at bigpodcast.com/subscribe. That will get you hooked up. You'll never miss an episode. And if you go there right now, before you forget, I will see you on the next episode of Build a Big Podcast.